The aesthetics of free improvisation ensembles are inseparable from the debates that were carried out by the European composers from the early 1960s onwards. The concept of freedom united with improvisation in the definition of this specific type of artistic creation had already entered the field of compositional theory and practice. The interaction of rationality and affectivity mentioned by Pierre Boulez in his 1963 essay for Adorno's 60th birthday, The Need for Aesthetic Orientation, is just one of the signs of the self-reflection of surrealist composers. On a more practical level, we can observe the adoption of aleatory procedures as well as the investigation of the corporeal and psychological aspects of musical performance, especially tangible in compositions by Vinko Globokar, Domenico Guaccero, Maurizio Kagel, and Dieter Schnebel. The increasing influence of John Cage's poetics was an important factor for this rethinking. Prominent members of the ensembles published writings on fundamental questions of free improvisation. They had a theoretical activity. The compositional techniques and theories, which are commonly labeled as post-serial, served as references either in terms of attraction or refusal. The most eloquent document of this type is Dalla forma momentanea ai gruppi di improvvisazione, from moment form to the improvisation groups, a short text that Evangelisti wrote for the 1969 program of the Venice Biennale Musica and then extended for a projected book, which was published as a collection of fragments after his death. Evangelisti saw a coherent development from the variation techniques of surrealism to that particular kind of variation which is represented by mobile and open forms. The novelty being a stronger engagement by the performance to attain the sonic shape of the piece. Variation, a keyword by John Cage, is perceivable in the comparison of different performances of the same piece. Evangelisti maintains that improvisation offers a chance to unify the figures of composer and performer, as well as to create a communication flow handled by a group of equal authors and directed to a specific audience in a specific time. In a short essay from 1968, Towards an Ethic of Improvisation, Cornelius Cardio summarized the variety of materials used by AMM with the term informal sound, emphasizing the resistance that such a fluid material opposes to the notion of musical structure. Cardio's definition, informal sound, is indirectly related to the lectures on musica informelle that Adorno held in Darmstadt in 1961, so seven years before his article. Here, the philosopher, Adorno, articulated his critique to the abstract procedures of some composers operating in the field of integral surrealism. The French definition, musique informelle, is related to art informel, a term coined by Michel Tapier in 1951 and employed in the following years to define the textual works of painters such as Jean Dubuffet, Jean Fautrier, Alberto Burri, and Emilio Vedova. It registers the European reception of American abstract expressionism. The consideration that the idea of informal music has gained with Adorno and Cardio, even in such different ways, testifies its wide theoretical scope. The members of the four above-mentioned ensembles related to serial music in non-linear and complex ways. The birth of new phonic art is directly linked to the seminar on Aus den Sieben Tagen that Karl-Heinz Stockhausen held in Darmstadt in 1969, and to the critical attitude of the future group members towards the notion of intuitive music. Among the protagonists of the serial composition, Luigi Nono had the closest relationship to improvisation. The involvements of clarinetist William Smith in A Floresta Jovem e Reia de Vida, 1966, and in the early 80s of Giancarlo Schiaffini in Prometeo and other compositions with live electronics are signs of an affinity rooted in his interest for the real-time action of the performance. Boulez was critical to group improvisation, maintaining that the unfolding of their performances inevitably followed the pattern of excitement, relaxation, excitement, relaxation. Nevertheless, the idea had to be at least metaphorically in his mind, since he gave the title improvisation to his important series of composition on Stéphane Mallarmé. In the free improvisation of the 1960s and 70s, the body of the performer is the center of attention, no less than the sound he or she produces. The strongest link between the two elements, body and sound, is the human voice. It is a sound production linked to the performance body without any mediation. This consideration brings us into the realm of theater, an area of the performing arts which precisely in the 1960s and 70s fulfilled a rapid change defined by open forms and improvisation. The decline of the role of the dramatic text, or even the full emancipation from it, shares some important features with the abandonment of the notated text by the improvising musicians. Both attitudes are demonstration of the performative turn. Spoken, yelled or sung words, facial gestures, body movements, all of them considered as theatrical materials in an almost endless field of possibilities, shift the dramatic art close to the art of sound. Improvisation plays a major role for innovators of theater, such as Jerzy Grotowski, Eugenio Barba, Carmelo Bene, Peter Brook, and Jacques Lecoq. In a recent book, Barba has collected a number of reflections on the new dramaturgical concepts, drawing on his half of a century experience. He emphasizes the role of improvisation for activating dormant memories and assessing the deepest strata of the unconscious. In this context, improvisation is not so much a means to enter unknown territories, but rather tends to coincide with the idea of a free montage of pre-existing text fragments. The accent is set on the instantaneous emergence and an unprecedented combination of available materials. Thus, Barba understands improvisation as a means to a composition which will be fixed in something that he dubs score. The final goal is the performance, in which the immediacy of improvisation merges with the order of a composition. The following passage of Barba's books furnishes interesting elements for a wide understanding of the role and the possible goals of an improvisatory action. In general, the term improvisation refers to at least three quite different procedures. Improvisation may be understood as the creation of actors' material. It is a process which gives life to a succession of physical or vocal actions, starting out from a text, a theme, images, mental or sensorial associations, a painting, a melody, memories or fantasies. In the second procedure, improvisation is synonymous with variation. The actor develops as a theme or a situation by alternating and combining material which is already incorporated. The elements previously assimilated appear spontaneously and assume different meanings according to the options, relationships, succession, rhythm, and context. This was the type of improvisation used by European actors from the Commedia dell'arte until Stanislavski and the reformers of the 20th century. The third procedure is far subtler. Here, improvisation means individualization. Evening after evening, the actor infuses life into the character sections, repeating a score which is often fixed down to the smallest detail. It would appear that everything is established and that possibilities for variations or new choices are excluded. Nevertheless, this type of improvisation is the most common in an actor's daily practice. It is the capacity to interpret their scores every evening with different nuances, as a pianist might interpret a composition by Beethoven. Let's take a look at an excerpt of a session of improvisation with Barba and members of Odin Theater in 1972.
Og se nu, hvor forunderligt det er gået mig, i stedet for at jeg former hende og giver hende skikkelse. Er det hende, der former mig og giver mig skikkelse. Hun har sine hænder omkring mit hjerte og gør det frit og gør mig tom. Forført mig til døden, og med mig dør også min drøm, den skønne figur. Billedet af Eva moren, jeg ser det nu, og hvis jeg har kræfter i hænderne, kunne jeg forme det, men hun ønsker det ikke. Hun vil ikke, at jeg skal gøre hendes hemmelighed synlig. Hun vil hellere, at jeg skal dø. Og jeg dør gerne, hun gør mig det lidt. Se nu, hvor forunderligt det er gået mig, i stedet for at jeg former hende. Giver hende skikkelse, er det hende, der former mig og giver mig skikkelse. Hun har sine hænder omkring mit hjerte og gør det frit og gør mig tom, forført mig til døden. Med mig dør også min drøm, den skønne figur, billedet af Eva moren. Jeg ser det nu, og hvis jeg har kræfter i hænderne, kunne jeg forme det. Men hun ønsker det ikke. Hun vil ikke, at jeg skal gøre hendes hemmelighed synlig. Hun vil hellere, at jeg skal dø, og jeg dør gerne. Hun kommer det lidt. Se nu, hvor forunderligt det er gået mig, i stedet for at jeg former hende og giver hende skikkelse. Er det hende, der former mig og giver mig skikkelse. Hun har sine hænder omkring mit hjerte. Hun vil hellere, at jeg skal dø, og jeg dør gerne. Hun gør mig det lidt. Se nu, hvor forunderligt det er gået mig, i stedet for at jeg former hende. Giver hende skikkelse. Er det hende, der former mig og giver mig skikkelse. Hun har sine hænder omkring mit hjerte og gør det frit og gør mig tom, forført mig til døden. Og med mig dør også min drøm, den skønne figur. Billedet af Eva moren, jeg ser det nu. Hun ønsker det ikke, hun vil ikke, at jeg skal gøre hendes hemmelighed synlig. Hun vil hellere, at jeg skal dø, og jeg dør gerne.
Voice is a shared domain of theater and music. In the 1960s and 70s, composers engaged with unexploited possibilities of the speech organ, sometimes in relation to experimental literature or even the combination of abstract phonemes. Katie Berberian, Carla Henius, Carol Plantamura, Michiko Hirayama, William Pearson, Demetrios Stratos were among the singers who helped the formation of a new area within vocal music. Most of them practiced improvisation. Between 1968 and 1974, Dieter Schnebel conceived Maulwerke für Artikulationsvorgänge und Reproduktionsgeräte, mouthworks for articulation processes and reproduction devices, a key composition of the recent history of vocal ensembles. The first part, Atemzüge, breaths, was performed for the first time by Carla Henius, Gisela Sauer, Kontarski and William Pearson at the 1970 Nuova Consonanza Festival in Rome. The piece is totally based on the vocal emissions of a group of vocalists, the number of members being undefined. Schnebel did not produce a score, but rather outlined in written form materials that the ensemble will perform following a shared order, resulting from a long phase of preparation that he called exercises, just like Nuova Consonanza. Maulwerke is based on vocal gestures. This means that every phonetic emission is linked to a peculiar body motion. Although the speech acts are implicitly theatrical, Maulwerk cannot be included in experimental music theater, an area in which the relationship between sound and gesture, acoustic and visual elements, is always conceived with consideration of the scenic space. Everyday gestures, separated from their practice and treated as musical materials, drag with them traces of the emotions and the psychic figures to which they are originally related. The affinity with improvisation lies not only in the role of the exercises, of Schnabel's exercises, intended as a preparatory stage of the performance, but also in the achievement of what Schnabel called communications. That is, forms of interaction between the members, following patterns of imitation, contraposition, complementation, dissociation. Also here, aesthetic indeterminacy unfolds in conjunction with technology. The reproduction devices mentioned in the title are microphones, which allow to make audible even minimal vocal emissions, and real-time filming, which has a similar role of the microphones for the visual elements. This is a page of a draft for the exercises, and now we will see some excerpts of a video produced for Dieter Schnabel's 80th birthday in 2010. The proximity of the musical and theatrical actions belong to the main areas of experimentation within the two arts in the 1960s and 70s. In the following excerpt of a duo performance of the Instant Composers Pool, Misha Mengenberg and Anne Benning, we can observe the theatrical staging and the relevance of the performance gestures.